Welcome to Rite Good, the only podcast that helps you write good. I'm Raquel Benedict, the most dangerous woman in speculative fiction. In this episode, we're talking to Jonny Pickering, founder and editor-in-chief of online dark fiction magazine, Seize the Press. Jonny, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to talk about your magazine. It is doing quite well considering it's so new. It's gotten a lot of attention.
I've been really surprised by the amount of attention it's got, actually. It's not something I ever expected to happen, but it's been a very pleasant surprise and a nice journey to go on, I guess.
Yeah, it's gotten, I know it's gotten added to some reading lists or maybe gotten some nominations for something, I think.
Yeah, I can probably go into more detail about that later on, but yeah, it's got a lot more attention than I ever expected. People who run very respected presses that I have a lot of respect for have highlighted some of the stories that we've ran, given them awards, putting them on shortlists. Yeah, very surprising, but very, very nice.
Yeah, so let's dive in. Why did you start Seize the Press?
It was quite a convoluted journey, actually, to get to what it ended up being. So originally it started out as a non-fiction magazine in my head. So I actually used to run a book review blog, nothing particularly serious, or I wasn't doing any particularly deep literary criticism or anything. I was just running a book blog that I talked about books I was reading. You get involved in any online community. There was a book blogging community that I got involved in, and I found that in certain parts of that community, there was a bit of a culture of sort of running PR campaigns for books rather than seriously reviewing them. Negative reviews are often looked down upon. There was often a lack of a willingness to do any serious criticism or analysis in genre fiction. And I guess there was a particular incident where I got invited on to do, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a blog tour, but if not, and for the benefit of the listeners, a blog tour is basically when a book is released and either the sort of the marketing people or the writer, if it's a self-published book, they'll contact a bunch of book reviewers, bloggers, and arrange like a tour for people to review the book. So I got on one of those, and I ended up really not liking the book. But one of the sort of stipulations of being part of the tour was that you couldn't post the review as part of the tour if you didn't like the book, which I found just insane. It was basically like the market is paying for positive reviews. I actually made a blog post after the fact talking about this and how people were basically paying for positive PR, and it caused a bit of there's a few days where it caused a bit of upset in that particular community.
Yeah, I can see people freaking out about,
Yeah.
oh, you told, you tattled, you blew the whistle.
Yeah, and people particularly weren't happy that I named the book in the post. So I said, I was on this blog tour. This is the book. I didn't like it, and yeah, so I found it very strange that one, there was people paying for bloggers to do unpaid PR for these books, and B, that the reaction to me saying I didn't like the book was so hostile. So yeah, that's basically just me saying that the lack of serious criticism or even a willingness to engage in criticism in that kind of genre community I found it very bizarre. Not long after that, I started thinking about potential outlets for starting some kind of online magazine or something to talk about serious criticism, or like just book reviews that were actually frank, honest, and open, and were willing to engage in actual criticism of genre books. Not long after that, I was introduced to Blood Knife, but I can't remember who it was now. But I just posted something out on Twitter, and someone said, "Hey, have you heard of Blood Knife magazine? They pretty much do all this stuff that you're talking about. It already exists." And I was like, "Oh, cool!" So I looked into Blood Knife and found out, oh, hey, this brilliant new online magazine is doing all the things that I was wanting to do. So I thought, okay, well, there's not so much need for me to start my own thing when Blood Knife is already doing such a fantastic job. But this was also sort of around the same time that I'd started feeling a little bit off about a lot of the short fiction I was reading as well.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's something a lot of Rite Gud listeners will be familiar with, but there's
Something that we harp on constantly.
yeah, but yeah, so the idea in my head sort of pivoted to running a magazine of short fiction that would hopefully be something of an antidote to that kind of saccharine, shallow short fiction that was dominating in a lot of the big genre magazines, particularly science fiction and fantasy. Horror not so much, but certainly a lot of the short fiction, science fiction and fantasy short fiction I was reading. I thought, look, there's got to be people out there writing the stuff that isn't being published, and yeah, if I can start somewhere that will give space to that, then I'll feel like I'm doing something positive. And that's basically how Seize the Press in its current incarnation came about. That I started wanting to run short fiction that would be able to give just a magazine that would give space to better fiction.
Right, right. I see what you mean. So it started as, in your head, started as a nonfiction venue, but it turned out that that niche was already filled. So you decided to build your own platform to run short genre fiction that's good and
Yeah,
not the kind of stuff that's already running.
we still do run some non-fiction as well, obviously, and reviews as well. So we started running,
Yeah,
um,
but it is mostly fiction from what I
yeah,
see.
mostly, yeah.
Yep. All right. So how long did it take you to launch Seize the Press? What was the process like from start to finish?
Probably around 4 months from me having the idea to it actually becoming a thing that people knew about. And I mean, to be honest, I didn't know what I was doing at the time. If I was aware of how much I didn't know at the time, I probably would never have set out to do it. So there was a lot of the learning process.
Mm.
It was a steep learning curve. I had a lot of fun with it. It was probably around, let us say, 4 months from having the idea to it going into a real life thing.
Mm. All right. So what is the ethos of Seize the Press?
So we're an anti-capitalist magazine. I'm a socialist, have been since I was old enough to be politically aware. So I guess a lot of the stories are kind of have an anti-capitalist tint to them, but not in a didactic way. It's one of the things that I really didn't want to be publishing. We do sometimes get people submitting stories that are something along the lines of bad capitalist man does bad thing to worker rises up and overcomes, and it's not the kind of thing I'm really interested in, to be honest.
Mm.
There's a lot of sort of I find in the sort of dominant liberal SFF establishment stories, there's a lot of kind of like liberal didacticism, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of people when we started an anti-capitalist magazine took that to mean, oh, so you want left-wing didacticism? Like, no, no.
Yeah.
Um, so,
It
so
can
yeah,
be kind of fun and escapist, but it gets really fucking boring.
yeah, exactly. I think
And
fundamentally
and you feel a little bit like you're watching a kid's show or reading a kid's book where it's
yeah,
like,
that's it.
then the good worker defeated the terrible man with a stovepipe hat on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Fundamentally, you want a good story first and foremost. I don't really want someone dumping their political beliefs into a story and passing it off as basically a manifesto passed off as a fiction story. That's not what we're looking for. In the current issue, there's a fantastic story called You Forever by Maxine Sophia Wolf, which is actually told from the perspective of a shitty law enforcement bureaucrat
Hmm.
who kind of abuses his position to stalk his ex-girlfriend. Um,
Oh.
I mean, it's a brilliant story, but it's told from the perspective of an awful, awful narrator. Someone that, like, if you as a left-wing person in law enforcement and not our friends, so it's told from the perspective of someone we would kind of consider not a good guy, but we kind of trust
Hmm.
our readers to understand. It's never explicitly said, but we kind of trust our readers to
Yeah.
understand that this story is told from the point of view of the bad guy. Other than that, we have an ethos of publishing uncomfortable stories, and I don't mean that in the sense of something that's necessarily going to make you recoil or go, ugh. I mean, it can be that, of course, but more along the lines of something that might actually make you question something you already believe, or maybe a story that's being told from the perspective of a character who you would relate to or would be rooting for in most circumstances, but maybe they do something that makes you feel uncomfortable or you don't agree with. They're not perfect people, essentially. I think so. Susan Palumbo, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but she's a fantastic short story writer who I think she put it really well, which she said something along the lines of she likes fiction that doesn't coddle the reader while exploring the
Mm,
human condition.
mm,
And that's something that we look for in our stories. Because I think fundamentally, art that just reinforces something that you already think or already feel or believe just isn't as interesting as something that perhaps makes you uncomfortable with certain aspects of yourself or
yeah,
your place in society or how you behave, even your own individual behavior in situations, because people are people at the end of the day. I think there's a certain move towards, especially among characters in stories of marginalized backgrounds and the marginalized writers who write them. There's an expectation almost that they are sort of paragons of moral virtue a lot of the time, and I don't know. It's just it doesn't. It rings really hollow to me because people are people at the end of the day. We all make mistakes. None of us are perfect, and even when we experience really shitty situations, we can behave in ways that aren't ideal. Perhaps
yeah,
they make the people around us feel bad, and it's just how it's just part of being
yeah.
alive and existing in the world.
And I kind of think it shows an immaturity in art when
Mm,
you want that. When we've made fun of cishet white men for a very long time for writing these sort of hero fantasy narratives about a big self-insert hero man defeating monsters and saving girls, and I think now we've had this explosion of that but diverse. And like, yeah, it can be gratifying if you're in that demographic seeing, someone like me gets to be the generic self-insert boring hero.
mm.
But then it's like, okay, I've seen enough of that. It's time to grow the fuck up.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's definitely room for those kinds of stories. It's just, yeah, I think there's just something more interesting to me about exploring stories that aren't that.
Yeah. I figure I get one of those and then that's enough. I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. What else you got? All right. So I noticed this magazine focuses on downbeat stories.
Mm.
Why do you specifically choose to focus on downbeat stories? Like in your submissions portal, you say, we want stories where everything isn't wrapped up neatly at the end, and you specifically ask for bleak sci fi.
Mm.
You use the word bleak
Yeah.
specifically.
Let me just preface this by saying that again, there's rooms for all types of stories because I think there's a perception among people who don't agree with what I'm about to say that I somehow or people who of of that persuasion think that light-hearted stories or stories with happy endings are inherently bad, and that's obviously
Mhm.
ludicrous. We don't think that. That's not not true.
Yeah.
But having said that, my perception of contemporary genre fiction, particularly in short fantasy and science fiction, is that there's this kind of general tendency to boost a sort of triumphalist feel good mode of story. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I do find that a lot of the stuff that falls into that category, and especially the stuff that gets a lot of attention in the big sci fi and fantasy awards, a lot of it is, again, in my opinion, often very shallow and it fails even to explore its own themes very, very well. There's a sort of the exploration of the themes, it's often relegated to an afterthought in service of a kind of debilitating catharsis, like catharsis not in a good way, something that just kind of demobilizes people and makes them feel good, as opposed to actually doing anything about the things, the injustices they're reading about. But also, I think there's this focus on representation in fiction and how important it is to see people overcoming the characteristics that marginalize them in the real world, whether that be class, sexuality, gender, physical disability, mental illness, and anything like that. And again, what you like you just said, well, that is important. I also think it's important to give space to writers and readers who want to explore what it's like to not be overcoming those things, maybe to be living with mental illness and be working a dog shit job that makes you feel even worse because you have to buy food and you have to pay the rent and you're feeling shitty about it and you're not overcoming everything because that's not always possible. People don't always get the happy ending in real life, and sometimes we want to explore art that recognizes that and makes us feel like we're not alone in that struggle and that we're not failures because we didn't bootstrap or girl boss our way out of the sad and depressing situations we find ourselves in at various
Hmm.
times in our lives. Yeah, so that's basically the reason why I wanted to specifically talk about bleak science fiction, stuff that explores the human condition in ways that, I don't know, allow people to see themselves and in a way that they might be able to recognize if they're not having the best of times.
Hmm. Okay, now let's talk about the process. How do you put together an issue of Seize the Press, like start to finish? How do you fund it? Who's doing the art? How are you handling web hosting? How are you handling slush reading, editing, so on and so forth?
When it comes to web hosting and all that kind of technical jargon, that I know nothing about that. But one of my good friends thankfully agreed to handle all that side for me because it's not something I'm very good at. So yeah, that all goes on in the background for me, thankfully. But when it comes to funding, Patreon is I guess it's our only source of funding at the minute. We have a small number of subscribers. I think we're up to around 80 subscribers at the moment who pay us on Patreon each month, and that goes towards paying the writers, the artists, the designers. So yeah, Patreon's our main source of funding at the moment. When it comes to art,
And how does the Patreon structure work exactly? I mean, are you paying for access? Are you paying for archives?
when a new issue is released, subscribers basically get full access to that full issue immediately, and they get an ebook copy to read. Whereas non-subscribers will typically get the issue released over a staggered period, and it's only available to read online. That was one of the things that I did want to make sure we did. I wanted to make sure that it was freely available to people who couldn't afford to subscribe. But one thing I have found with the I don't know, the models of a lot of fiction magazines at the minute is that if they give away everything for free immediately, it's very difficult to draw in any money to pay your creators that way because people
Hmm.
just think, well, everything's immediately free. Why, unless I have some very personal or deeply held connection to the people who run it, or I really, really like what they're putting out, then there's no sort of incentive to actually fund the thing. And it's really difficult, actually, especially now, to get people to pay for short fiction because there's so much of it available online for free that
Yeah,
people are spoiled for choice. Unless they really, really want to read something specific, there's no reason
yeah.
for them to pay for it because they can just go somewhere else and read something else. But thankfully, there does seem to have been a good number of people who have been willing to become subscribers and support us, which is nice because it was talking about our ethos. It's very important to me that we pay our creators, and we don't pay them enough as much as I would like to at the minute. And that will any additional money that comes into our Patreon in the future will always go towards paying our creators. It's something I feel very strongly about, that people deserve to be paid for their creative work. Slush reading, we have a small team of slush readers who read stuff as it comes in. It started out differently. We had a larger team to begin with. Of It was sort of a more ad hoc basis. People could just sort of dip in and read whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And we had a bigger team to accommodate that. And that was right at the beginning when we didn't have as many submissions coming in. Now, though, it's got to the point where we've got more submissions coming in than I can handle on
About
my
how
own.
many, roughly, submissions are you getting a month?
Ooh, probably about between 400 and 500. So I basically used to still, even when we had the large slush team, because it was ad hoc and people would just dip in as and when they were able, I was still the one reading
I
most of the
was on
slush.
that,
Yeah,
yeah.
you were, yeah. It just got to the point now where I'm just physically unable to read all the submissions that are coming in. So yeah, we've got a smaller team now, but who have committed to reading a certain number of slush stories coming in each month. It's easier to manage what's coming in. When it comes to editing, I edit all the fiction. Typically, what comes in, for the most part, I'd say 80 to 90% of the stories are pretty much in publishable condition when they come in. The ones that I decide to publish, that is, with just some sort of minor changes and things here and there. That's not too difficult. Occasionally, there will be a story that comes in that I see a lot of potential in, but just isn't quite there. In those cases, I'll work quite closely with the author to get it to where it needs to be a seize the press story. I do all the fiction editing. Carlo Jaeger Rodriguez is our non-fiction editor. He does all the non-fiction side. When it comes to the art, I don't think I mentioned the art. Basically, I tend to just look around on various websites where artists are posting their work. I've been following artists on Twitter whose work I like, and I'll just get in touch with them and say, hey, I've seen this piece of yours. Would you be interested in licensing it to us to use on our cover? And you will pay them a certain amount just to use it on the cover. And usually they're very happy to do it. It's work they've already created. They get to keep all the rights. We're just saying, hey, we'll use it on our cover. We'll give you some money. And they're like, yeah, sure, sounds good. And J.R. Bolt, who's also been on Rite Gud before.
Sorry, J.R. Bolt?
Yep, he does the design. So basically, we'll have the artwork and you'll see all the overlays and the design work and fonts and everything. He does all of that and he does a fantastic job.
So what do you think draws people to seize the press?
One thing that I do hear a lot is people say we have a very specific vibe. It's not something I initially set out to have a specific vibe initially, but I think over time we've established a particular kind of story or kind of writing that we tend to put out there. Often it's a bit off kilter. The writing style is not something you're typically likely to see elsewhere. That's one major thing that gets pointed out to me a lot. I think the cover art and design work as well that I've just mentioned. The people have said that we have a very specific kind of vibe for the cover art as well that I think attracts people to maybe check things out further.
Like what kind of vibe?
Again, unsettling, maybe, a bit weird. Because I don't know, I see a lot of magazines out there putting out cover art that's fine. Like, it does its job, it's functional, I guess, but I don't know, you'd never see it and think about it again. Whereas when I'm looking for artwork for the covers, I like to find something that stands on its own as artwork as well. It's not just cover art for a magazine. It's interesting and thought-provoking in and of itself. I think it's particularly important sort of when you're relying on social media as well to publicize things. If people are just scrolling through the feeds and they tend to just look at something for half a second and keep scrolling. If you want to have something that's going to attract someone's attention and keep them and get them interested, and I think the out cover art does that as well. And I think as well once they have been drawn in by that artwork, once they start reading the stories as well, I think that has kept people hooked as well. That again, that unsettling, weird, off-kilter vibe of a lot of the stories that we put out there.
Does Seize the Press make any kind of money? How's it going financially? Because short fiction, especially short genre fiction, famously is a place where you're not gonna make the big bucks.
No.
So like, how do you monetize this? What's the financial system or the financial situation look like exactly?
Well, we don't make any money. All the money that comes in from our Patreon goes towards paying our writers and creators and artists. And I don't ever envisage it being a money-making venture. It's not the reason I set out to do it. And any money that comes in future will go towards increasing payment rates for our writers. At the minute, we pay 3p GBP per word, which I think equates to around 4 cents US, which is better than a lot of places pay, to be honest. But it's still nowhere near what I want it to be.
Yeah, it's not a pro rate by
nowhere
the
near.
SFWA standards.
I mean,
Semi-pro, I guess.
We actually did start out paying pro rates. So when we first started, I'd basically set some money aside that I'd saved. And I kind of naively thought that by the time that money ran out,
of course,
that we'd have built up enough of a following and subscriber base that we can
The
continue
money will
to.
just be rolling
Yeah,
in
yeah, and
for short internet dark fiction.
yeah, and this is what
A
I've.
leftist publication. You're just gonna fucking throw a bunch of dollar bills on the bed and roll around in them like Endangered Diabolic.
Yeah, it didn't work out that way. Like I said, I
Didn't
was
happen.
very naive when I first started out. I didn't know what I was doing. So when that.
I get the sense from most people who start a magazine that's how it goes. Going like, this is gonna be easy, and then you go like, oh fuck,
Yeah,
Jesus.
it's still, as I say, it's been a lot more successful than I ever kind of thought it would be.
Yeah, it is doing really well.
But the money wise, it's still quite difficult
Yeah,
to bring money
that
in.
is that is publishing. Just in general, that is publishing.
Yeah, but we do have a lot of our subscriber base is building. Hopefully, we'll be able to raise our payment rates with any additional money that comes in. None of that money will ever go to us. It'll always go to our writers and artists.
Yeah. Now, how do you spread the word about Seize the Press? How did you build a readership? Because as any creative, any artist knows, as any writer knows, it's hard to get eyeballs on your work, especially when it's fiction. You can put out absolutely brilliant stuff, but that is no guarantee that people are going to come and look at it. So how did you build this audience?
Honestly, I think it's just a combination of luck and just making something that stands out and is actually different and has kind of filled a void that people are
But
looking to
even
fill.
then, how did you promote it? How did you get people to see it?
Yeah.
Because you even if you have something that looks great and is great, that's still absolutely no guarantee.
No. I mean, mainly it was just through social media, and specifically just Twitter. And I mean,
Did you have a social media strategy?
nope. I mean, this is the thing.
Okay.
I am not I'm not a marketing guy. Like I've no experience in marketing. My day job is I work in the National Health Service in the UK. So yeah, I work in healthcare. I'm not a marketing guy. I've no
Yeah.
experience in anything like that. So again, it all comes back to not really knowing how much I didn't know. Basically, we would, I guess it was just me at the time, sort of post on Twitter. I would talk to people.
Like who? What kind of people?
Kurt Schiller
And again,
specifically.
posting is not enough to get people
No,
to,
no, definitely not.
not
Yeah,
at all. That's not
definitely
enough.
not. No, but Kurt Schiller specifically, the editor of Blood Knife. I spoke earlier about how someone pointed me in the direction of Blood Knife very early on, and I messaged Kurt, and he was incredibly helpful in those early stages. And honestly, to the point where I don't think Seize the Press would even exist without Kurt. All that help he gave me early on, without help about how to set things up, but specifically setting up the website as well, because I think the website, we didn't, again, you say posting isn't enough to get attention, and it's not, but I think just having something compelling that fills a kind of niche if people are looking for something specific that isn't being provided, and it kind of just spread through word of mouth, I guess. And I realize there's a very, very big element of survivorship bias here. I mean, I know we're only a year and a half old, like touch wood, we keep going, but there is a very big element of survivorship bias in that somehow I didn't have any experience and it worked out. The only thing that I would say with regards to people who are wanting to get eyes on their work is that if you're submitting to magazines, submit to places that are going to put in the work to actually get your eyes on your work, and who do stand out from the rest of the crowd. Because, and I say this even about magazines that I read and enjoy, a lot of them are quite samey. Like even the ones that publish good stories, there's nothing that makes them stand out from the next one. So if a magazine has got a particular vibe, as people say we do, or people read it for a particular reason, and it's filling that kind of niche that people are looking for, I think people are more likely to look at stuff like that fills that kind of niche, as opposed to something that's just putting out a magazine with like generic cover art and doesn't differentiate itself from anything else. And again, writers don't necessarily have any control over who decides to accept their work. And I guess this is more of a problem with the publishing side of things than the writing side of things. I think a lot of magazines have a lot of work to do when it comes to, I don't want to say marketing themselves. I don't like that term because, as I say, I don't really have that background, and marketing to me has a bit of
It's
a
fine. Just, this is a business. Yeah,
yeah,
you're doing a creative thing, but
yeah,
you are selling a product, you are marketing a product. It's kind of, you might as well own up to it,
yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me to be embarrassed about that. This is just the reality of the industry we work in.
Yeah, well, just I guess in that case, magazines just being better at talking about themselves, marketing themselves, differentiating themselves from whatever other generic sci-fi horror magazine is vying for people's attention. And I think that's something we have been successful at. People do think that we're different, and we put out something that you're not necessarily going to find elsewhere. And I think that that's a big part of what gets eyes on Seize the Press stories.
All right. How has Seize the Press changed over the course of its so far very brief existence?
Yeah, well, as I said, we're only 18 months old. Yeah, we've been around for a year and a half, and I think over that time we've really kind of nailed down that vibe that we've been talking about. I think early on, I don't know, maybe there might be some stories from earlier issues that I perhaps wouldn't decide to put in the current iteration of the magazine. Not because I don't think they're good stories, but because over the course of our existence, I think we've nailed down something very specific that we look for. And I guess another thing is we've moved offline, which was a big thing. We do still have our website, and our stories do go up online for non-subscribers, but we do also produce an ebook copy of the magazine now, which goes out to our subscribers as soon as the new issue comes out. That was a big thing that I'd always wanted to do. The next thing is I hopefully want to produce physical copies at some point, but that has its own problems and issues. We've expanded as well. So it used to just be me. It was literally just me when we first started out. We've since doubled our staff, I guess you can call us. So we've took on Carlo Jaeger Rodriguez as our non-fiction editor. Carlo was in the first issue of the magazine. He submitted a story called Vanishing, which was received very, very well. It was a story that had been knocked back from a lot of other magazines.
Could you talk a little
For
bit about Vanishing? What is it about? What drew you to it? And why do you think it found a home in Seize the Press and not anywhere else?
so Vanishing is
Stop it. Cat, stop attacking the bed. That's not a scratching post. You have a scratch. Okay. Thank you.
I was hoping the cats might make an appearance.
Yeah. Penny's
So
being a bad girl.
Vanishing it's a story. It's a story about specifically the Latinx experience in America with the situation on the borders. I mean, I say when Trump was president, but the whole point of the story is that the child separation and all those horrors that were going on under Trump also carried on under once Joe Biden was elected. And that's kind of the whole idea of the story. It doesn't specifically say any of this. If Carlo had sent me a story saying, hey, Trump bad and Biden also just as bad, and this is what's going on at the border, okay, whatever. But like none of that's explicitly stated. It's a sort of story that digs into that experience in a very nuanced way without being didactic in that way that I didn't want to see. It's a very powerful story, and I think, I mean, I'm guessing here, but I think the reason it had potentially been knocked back from a lot of other places is because I guess some people might get angry at me for this, but I think once Trump went and Biden was elected and the Democrats were back in power in America, and I'm from the UK, as you can probably tell, but we get a lot of US politics and culture kind of by osmosis. But I think from what I could tell was that once the Democrats were back in power, no one really wanted to think about this anymore. They thought the bad man's gone, we can fix everything. Our guy's in power, and we don't want to be reminded or told that everything bad that was going on before is still going on. There's that whole element of we can go back to brunch now. Yeah, and I think my perspective is that I think it probably made a lot of people uncomfortable. They didn't want to think about it. But that's exactly the reason why it was the kind of thing we were looking to publish. And as I say, that was in our first issue, so I think it kind of set a tone for the kind of thing that we wanted to do going forward. Yeah. And again, then we published a non-fiction piece from Carlo in the next issue as well. He wrote a piece about the Netflix adaptation of Cowboy Bebop and how it kind of defanged the original story. Not long after that, I think it was a couple of issues later, I'd asked if he'd be interested in coming on as our non-fiction editor, and he agreed. Yeah, so now Carlo's part of the Seize the Press team, and yeah.
Okay. Where does Seize the Press fit in among the rest of the short sci-fi fantasy magazine ecosystem? You've talked a lot about how it fulfills a certain niche. Like, can you tell me in more specificity what that niche is and sort of how it's getting along, if it is getting along or if it's not getting along with the other SFF mags? Like, are you fulfilling a necessary role in the ecosystem, or are you an invasive species, you know?
Well, I wouldn't describe ourselves that way. Maybe some others would. I don't know. But I don't know. I guess in a lot of ways we don't really fit in among a lot of the more established magazines. I mean, a big part of the reason why I wanted to start publishing the kind of fiction we do is because they don't get the space that they deserve in a lot of the bigger, more mainstream short fiction magazines. Yeah, we don't really fit in among a lot of the bigger magazines. But I mean, I guess at the same time, there does seem to have been a resurgence lately in the kind of publications that are putting out the weirder, non-mainstream stuff. I think there's Tower Magazine, which has recently come out, Mouthfeel, which is getting ready to publish its first issue. These are magazines that are publishing stuff that you would never would never see the time of day in some of the bigger establishment magazines.
Why not?
I guess because they make people uncomfortable. People don't like discomfort. Yeah, you see a lot of the stories that are being nominated, well, at least winning awards anyway. The ones voted for by readers in these ecosystems, or at least the ones that are active in them anyway, and the paying members of the organizations, they don't like discomfort. They don't like being made to feel things. I guess they don't want to question anything. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. There's a niche of people who do want that, and maybe it is a minority. It probably is a minority, but it was a minority that I don't think was being served in the way they deserved. So in that way, I guess we don't really fit in very well among some of the bigger, more established magazines. I mean, there are still good ones. Don't get me wrong. There's The Dark. There's Apex publishes a lot of good stuff. Clark's World, which is a science fiction magazine, isn't necessarily publishing the kind uncomfortable things in the same way necessarily, but they do publish still good stories. So yeah, there is definitely good stuff out there. I'm definitely not saying that we're in a desert here and there's nothing good out there that before we came along. It's absolutely not the case. But I do think that...
No, you should say it. Don't be so timid. Seize the Press is a very bold magazine. You should not be afraid to be bold.
Well, thank you.
You're like, yeah, there were other magazines before us, but they sucked ass, and here we are.
Yeah, well,
Would Clark's World run a story called Eating Bees from the Ass of God? No, it wouldn't.
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. More's the shame.
And again, that was in our first issue. I think that was in the first issue.
Yeah, that is a bold choice.
Yeah, so there was
that. Release that in your first issue.
There was that story and Vanishing, and obviously the few others that we ran. I think it was a bold statement to make right out of the gate.
Just hi there, here we are, fuckers. What up?
Yeah.
Are you willing to talk about why you opted not to give Tor reviews advanced copies of each issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it. I'm not sure how spicy we'll get. We'll see, and maybe.
Get spicy. We love spice.
We'll see. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so I guess I'll explain the situation first of all. So I was contacted by the person who runs the short fiction roundup for Tor.com, which is the sort of online magazine that the imprint Tor runs online.
Yeah, now Tor.com is different from Tor.com, right?
Yeah, so It's very confusing. So basically, you've got Tor
It's
books.
really, really good. It's like a stand-up comedy routine from like the late
It's
90s.
really strange. So you've got
It's
Tor
so
books
odd.
who publish books. You've got Tor.com who also publish books but are different in some way. And then you've also
And
got
Tor, the book publisher's website is tor.com. But what is Tor.com's website URL? Is it like tor.com.com?
it's surreal. It's a very strange situation. I don't know how they differentiate themselves, but basically,
It's real weird.
in this instance, the Tor.com that we're talking about is the online magazine that they run, and as part of that, they run a monthly short fiction roundup of what the reader has been enjoying and reading that month. I was contacted by the person who runs that, and they asked if they
Sorry,
could...
I just looked it up. I had to interject, but the sci-fi fantasy publisher is tor.com is the website, and that's Tor.
Yeah.
But their other, or their, maybe I'm getting this backwards. Maybe this is the book publisher. I don't fucking know. But there's tor.com is the company name, and its URL is publishing.tor.com, which makes very good sense, and no one could reasonably be confused by the two of these things. It's very good. It's very good to me.
All I'll say is it's a good job that they're a multinational corporation, because otherwise I think people wouldn't give them the time of day. It's too confusing. But they have that clout behind them. So yeah, I was contacted by the person who runs their monthly short fiction roundup, and they asked if we would want to give them advance copies of each new issue to read and potentially feature in their monthly short fiction roundup.
Which is a very good way to get eyeballs on your work.
Yeah, it is. And so I debated a lot about whether I wanted to be included in this, because as you say, I think Tor.com has something like 1.5 million people visiting the website each month. And of course, not all of those people are visiting the specific short fiction roundup, but all the same, it's going to have a wide reach. So it would be a very good way to get other people to be aware of Seize the Press and potentially get more eyeballs on our stories. And so for that reason, I debated about whether, because as an editor, right, I have a kind of obligation to the writers who submit to us and who we publish to get people reading their stories. It's the whole point of submitting stories. You want to get paid for your work, and you want people to read your work. But when it comes to Tor, one of the reasons when it comes back to the reasons we set up Seize the Press, Tor is kind of part of that ecosystem, like a big part of that ecosystem of this kind of shallow, fandom-centric publishing ecosystem. So a lot of the stuff that you see on Tor.com, on the online magazine, it's all like listicles, shallow reviews. They think they're doing like a read-along of some Brandon Sanderson series at the minute, where they just talk about what part of the book they're up to at the minute and kind of get excited about what's going on in whatever Brandon Sanderson book they're reading. That whole ecosystem is like the antithesis of what I want STP to be part of. It's part of the founding ethos that we didn't really want to be part of that. We wanted to build something separate.
Yeah, and something I want to point out too about Tor is that it's a little weird, but within sci-fi fantasy, people kind of talk about it like it's this scrappy little publisher, and it's not. It's very much a corporate publisher.
Yeah, Tor is an imprint of Macmillan, I think, which is one of the big four publishers. So yeah, like they have this. I don't know how they've managed it or cultivated this idea, but yeah, they have this kind of scrappy underdog image. But really,
and they're not at all underdogs, not even remotely.
Multinational corporation, one of the big four publishers. And again, I want to say it's not like we're not boycotting Tor for that reason. We've even got
you should throw a brick through their window, go full Antifa. Do it.
So we've even got a review of a Tor book.
Seize the Press, literally. Get in there and seize their press and like take it.
Well, that was that's the play on words that the title, the name of the magazine plays on. Yeah, we've even got a review of a Tor book in the upcoming issue. Zach Gillen has reviewed The Archive Undying, which is a new Tor release, and it gets a very positive review. I've read some Tor books in the past that I've liked. I think they published the Baru Cormorant books. They've published Tade Thompson. And even despite the horrific artwork they put alongside it. They even republished the Black Company books.
Oh yeah, the terrible
Oh, it's so
covers.
bad. It's so bad.
It's so offensive.
Like clip art covers.
Really, really bad. I think is that the one that used Warhammer 40K figurines in front of a fog machine?
Yeah, it's so bad.
Was
Which is
that them?
the books are so good as well, man. It's so upsetting because they're some of the best books I've ever read. They're just fantastic. Just to disrespect them with cover art like that, it's very sad. But yeah, it's not a boycott of Tor because big bad publishing. It's specifically because Tor.com is part of that kind of really shallow publishing ecosystem that we set Seize the Press up to kind of be against, I guess. So it felt a little bit hypocritical to be saying, yeah, well, we set up our magazine specifically because we don't like the kind of stuff that publications like you are doing. But hey, yeah, please go ahead and include our stories in your monthly roundup. And to be honest, I looked at the roundup itself. I had a look at a few of them to see whether it would be worth. As part of the weighing up the pros and cons, I had a look, and even aside from just getting eyes on them, the roundups themselves were really not good. When you read a review of a book, do you expect to have some exploration of the themes or like how it made you feel? Or
Right.
it was basically just a short summary of what the person read and maybe like, hey, this story could be about this, but this is like the plot.
Oh.
This is the plot of the story. That's basically all it was.
So it's like a kid's book report
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, it's just shallow nothingness. There's just nothing to it, and I didn't really want to be part of it. And I did feel bad in some ways because, like I said, I do feel like as the editor of the magazine, I have an obligation to our writers to get people reading their work. But at the same time, I think we're a magazine that has kind of that strong ethos that we mentioned earlier, and I don't want to I don't want to undermine that. I think like it's one of the reasons people like what we do, and I think to undermine that would just be it would undermine everything we do, I think.
Do you think though at very least the fact that Tor is paying attention to you, that's probably a really positive sign, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, in some ways, it kind of felt pretty good to be like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. We're not interested from like one of the big publishing guys. But yeah, it's definitely a positive sign that they're paying attention to us, or they want to pay attention to us at least. Yeah, it's not. I never expected when I started the magazine to have Tor asking for advance copies of the magazine to review.
What have been some of the bigger bumps along the way?
Oh, there've been a bunch, but it's stuff that I hope hasn't been too visible to the people reading the magazine. Mostly it's been me desperately trying to learn everything I hadn't realized I needed to know beforehand and kind of scrambling to get issues out on time while I'm working a full-time job. So it's really hard, man, to do everything I want to do with Seize the Press requires a lot more time than I currently have.
Oh yeah.
And it can be very stressful and frustrating. I guess knowing that it could be so much more if I just had that time and all and money. So I think I'd probably I'd like to improve the website. I'd start like to make physical copies of the magazine. We've had like a few requests for like merch, like t-shirts and stuff. First off, that's a bunch of other stuff I need to learn how to do. Like I say, it requires money and time that we don't really have at the minute. So I guess the biggest bumps are just that definitely at the start, like I didn't know what I was doing. I hope that stuff, and I think it is stuff that didn't necessarily translate and or come across to the people, like the end product and people actually reading the thing. It's all stuff that I've been doing in the background, floundering around trying to get things out on time and get all the edits done. But I guess that's just like the normal stuff for running a magazine. But it's stuff that I had to learn on the fly because I was I was naive enough to not know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
I think we've weathered the storm to the point where I'm at least notionally competent, I hope.
That's good. All right. Now, tell me about some of your proudest achievements with Seize the Press, like some stories that you've been proudest to say, I put this out, or maybe responses to it that you've been incredibly proud of receiving?
Probably the proudest achievement is probably having so many stories make the shortlist for Tenebris Press's Brave New Weird Award. I mean, let me just give a shout out to Tenebris Press. They're fucking brilliant.
Oh yeah, they do a lot of good weird
Yeah,
shit.
they're so good. Matt Blairstone and Alex Woodrow, who the people who run it, they're just some of the most dedicated, hard-working people that I know. They're just fantastic. They've put out a lot of fantastic, really weird, strange horror novellas. They've put a lot of novellas out. Just really good stuff that I doubt many other presses would have took a chance on. They ran a best of new weird horror award last year. Was it this year? I don't know. What is time? And we had 4 stories, 4 Seize the Press stories shortlisted for that award. It was the most amount of stories that any single publication had shortlisted for that. So we had What It's Like by Riley Tao, which was this incredible kind of stream of consciousness, kind of scream of rage by a trans writer about their experience of being trans. All these stories will be available on our website if people want to go and read them, by the way. So What It's Like by Riley Tao was nominated. Those Who Forget and Those Who Perish by K.W. Colliard, which was this kind of, I guess it was a kind of secondary world dark fantasy body horror story. I don't know. I don't really know how to categorize a lot of these things because they defy categorization a lot of the time. But it was kind of a story about a horse kingdom where women were kind of stitched up, sort of Dr. Moreau style, to horses. It was kind of a story about living as a woman in that kind of patriarchal society that took women's bodies for granted and used them how they saw fit. The other one that was nominated was What the Gula Said on Thursday of the Dead by Sonia Suleiman, which she describes as a Palestinian Gothic, which was about settler colonialism in Palestine. And again, a subject that I don't think a lot of presses would feel comfortable highlighting, but it's something that's always been very important to me. The whole Palestine solidarity movement is what got me into left-wing politics originally, to be honest. So it's something that's always been important to me. So I was very happy that got a lot of attention. And Low Tide Jenny by Bitter Corella.
Oh, that one's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That not only made the shortlist, that was actually included. That actually won one of the awards and was included in the Brave New Weird anthology. Yeah, it's a really strange story. Bitter Corella's great. They write a lot of fantastic stuff. But this it's kind of a take on the Chambers story. It includes a kind of element of Carcosa from The King in Yellow. There's been a lot of sort of riffing on that kind of idea, but I think Corella did a fantastic job in their own way. And yeah, that actually won one of the awards. Yeah, fantastic story. Some of the others, like I think you mentioned Eating Bees from the Ass of God by Joe Koch. That one still gets a lot of attention today, in no small part, perhaps because of the provocative title.
Yeah.
But once you start reading the story, it's this, I don't know, it's this really kind of gross but beautifully poetic in a lot of ways, cosmic horror story. Actually, one story that I think it does get talked about, but deserves to be talked about a lot more is Reno Walled City by Naim Kabir, which is the only sort of cyberpunk story that we've run. And it's a great story because it's a cyberpunk story that actually nails that kind of alienation and kind of ennui that some of the early cyberpunk really nailed down, but kind of became less and less important as the genre became just a bit more about, I don't know, empty aesthetics, which is the sad story of cyberpunk, unfortunately. But when cyberpunk's done brilliantly, it's when it's done well,
it's great.
It's great.
But yeah, there's a lot of people who kind of look, it's got robots and swears.
Robot
that's
arms.
Kind of all it is.
And neon and robot arms.
Cyborgs who say fuck a lot. That's what cyberpunk is. Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but this story really kind of nailed that specific kind of, really harkened back to that early cyberpunk that really. I mean, I say like sort of anti-capitalist critique, but William Gibson became a kind of weird liberal in his later days. I think he has
A
some.
lot of these guys
Yeah,
did.
he has some.
A lot of people kind of, well, you're comfortable and middle-aged,
Yeah,
and then your politics sort of become whatever makes you feel okay about being comfortable and middle-aged.
yeah. But certainly, Reno Walled City remind me a lot of like of Neuromancer, which is one of my favorite books. He really nailed that early cyberpunk vibe.
Okay. So why don't we turn to the future? Do you have any big plans for where Seize the Press might go? Where would you like to see it go?
One thing I've always really wanted to do is be able to produce print issues of the magazine, but
Yeah.
my God, it is that
But
expensive.
the shipping would be hell.
Yeah, it's so expensive.
International shipping is like,
yeah,
God, it's a fucking nightmare.
and I mean, again, it's something that I would have to learn to do because I've never put a physical copy of a magazine together myself. I think
Yeah.
if I was gonna do it, I'd probably keep it quiet for a little while first, and maybe produce a prototype copy or something, and see if it's something I'm actually capable of doing first.
Yeah.
But certainly print issues are something I'd really love to see print issues. It's something people are always asking for, and I'm just like, oh, I'm really sorry. We have very limited money.
Yeah, it costs money, especially to make something that looks really nice.
Yeah.
If you're gonna print in color with illustrations,
And that's the
you want
thing.
something really slick.
Yeah, if we were going to do it, I'd want to do it properly. I want it to look good.
Yeah.
I'd want it to be good quality print, and I want there to be artwork in there, which would also mean like paying artists for. Because I probably want like for each story an accompanying art piece of
Oh,
art.
yeah.
I mean, I know that's not strictly necessary, but it's just something I would like to do. If we were going to do a print issue, I'd like to do it properly and do it well. And
Yeah.
I know it's something Dark Matter magazine were doing,
Yeah.
and they did it well.
Unfortunately, it ain't cheap.
Nope, certainly not, and it's just
Nah.
not something we have the money for at the minute, unfortunately. The other thing is that, and this is like a complete pipe dream, and not something I'm even sure I'm cut out to do, but people have also asked if we ever planned to start like an actual press publishing like books or novellas. And again, that's something I would love to do, but I absolutely don't have the time for it at the minute, and it's also something that I again have no experience with. But I never had experience running a magazine either, and that's turned out okay. I'd certainly want to look into that, but I'd want to build up some experience beforehand. Maybe like work with someone putting out an anthology as just helping on a project or something by learning how to put out a book first. Because again,
Yeah.
I'd want to do it properly. I think I'd owe that to our writers.
Yeah.
It's not something I want to jump into, but yeah, those are two things I'd really love to do in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we wrap it up? I'd ask you if you had anything you wanted to promote, but I think that's pretty much what this entire episode.
Yeah.
Would you like to promote something? Yes, you would like to promote something. It's called Seize the Press magazine.
Yeah,
And what is the URL?
So you can visit us at seizethepress.com. So you'll be able to read a lot of our past issues. There's a lot of stories up there for free that we've ran in past issues. If you do want to become a subscriber, you can find us at patreon.com/seizethepress, and you'll get access to every issue immediately once it's released. You'll be able to read the whole thing, and you'll get an ebook copy of the magazine, and you'll also be ensuring that we can continue paying our writers, which is something that we believe in very strongly.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm going to wrap it up because Harley is getting feisty. He's paying some attention, getting near that time of the evening where I feed them. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, head to patreon.com/Rite Gud and subscribe. Until next time, keep writing good.
This has been Rite Gud with Raquel S. Benedict. Hosted by Raquel S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Theme song by OK Glass. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegood@kittystasis.com. That is RITEGUD@kittystasis.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegood. This has been a Kitty Stasis production.
kittysneezes.com in color.